leaders have discussed. Racist branding. Germany's Die Zeit is among many publications picking up on the commercial fallout of the Black Lives Matter movement, with global brands acknowledging that uncomfortable racial stereotypes like this attached to their products need changing. And it's Trump versus Bolton, with the Washington Post fully focused on the war of words between the US president and his former national security advisor, John Bolton. Now, top House Democrats are also weighing in as they consider whether Bolton should be subpoenaed and questioned over the book's allegations. Well, joining me today are my guests, French journalist Nabila Ramdani and Brexit editor at the Daily Telegraph, Asa Bennett. Appearing as if by magic. Good to see both of you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Nabila, let me start with you because Emmanuel Macron's in London. He's marking the anniversary of the resistance, the speech for resistance by Charles de Gaulle. Apart from the dreadful weather, what do you think he might have been discussing with Boris Johnson then? I'm guessing EU trade and Brexit was one of the things they might have talked about.
Yes, indeed. Well, as you said, he was in London. He is in London primarily to commemorate the 80th anniversary of de Gaulle's famous BBC broadcast appeal from London to the French people to resist the Nazis. And that's one of the main reasons why Macron awarded London the Légion d'honneur for its wartime effort. Charles de Gaulle became, of course, the head of the Free French during the occupation. And clearly, this year is a highly significant anniversary. But beyond the pomp and circumstance, because let's not forget that Prince Charles and Duchess of Cornwall were Macron's main hosts, Macron made it very clear that he would be discussing very tense bilateral issues with Boris Johnson, including the fight against coronavirus and indeed Brexit. Ahead of the visit, Élysée Palace aides were not at all happy with the way trade deal talks have been developing, and Macron himself is very unhappy about the whole Brexit project, but he didn't want this to overshadow the historical importance of today's visit. But clearly the Brexit talks today were particularly fraught because both sides are keen for a deal, but things aren't looking good at the moment. They have not got
well, let me bring in Asa, because, I mean, this is your area of expertise, and I think it's fair to say President Macron is one of those leaders who is really, really hacked off that not more progress is being made with talks with the UK.
Well, certainly, and actually as a good visual metaphor of this, what struck me was the fact that when the president was catching up with Boris Johnson, they obviously had to stand 2 meters apart. It was not so much an entente cordiale, but an entente spatiale. And I think that really spoke to the distance, literally, between them for social distancing, but also between their negotiators on the Brexit front, because they still have to argue about all these incredibly turgid bits of jargon like level playing field. How do you interpret it? Perhaps there is a deal to be done, though, in that the UK can at least agree something, but still has the sovereign right to do its own rules if it wants and accept the penalties. But of course, this wasn't the time for bilateral chats. It was all about, bon ami.
What about this quarantine issue, guys? Because obviously, as a world leader, Macron was not expected to undergo quarantine. But this is one of the things that France is keen to get rid of with the UK, isn't it? This 14-day quarantine. Nabila, do you think that it's going to be lifted or restrictions will be eased for France?
I think a key word in all this will be business, and business to try to resume some sort of, business as usual, dare I say. And the crux of the matter will, be on finding a new trade deal by the end of this year, when the transitional arrangement between the two countries will end. Otherwise, the prospect of a no deal is looming. And dare I say, the forthcoming EU Leaders Summit in Friday is a crucial one, because the bloc is facing its biggest recession since the Second World War, and it needs agreement on the budget and indeed on a recovery plan. And the pandemic is clearly a huge test for the world and indeed for the European project. The 27 member states need consensus on a joint economic rescue plan. And as usual, this will pit fiscally conservative northern countries against southern countries, which are more inclined to get into debt.
OK, let's move on to our second story. A US company Quaker Oats has announced it's going to rename its Aunt Jemima line of syrups and foods. I mean, this is one of several countries now taking another good look at its kind of branding. Asa, as our token white male today in the studio, when you see things like this, the Aunt Jemima, now I didn't realise myself personally that this was based on an actual character from a minstrel show back in the 1800s, which was seen as mocking African Americans. Do things like this make you uncomfortable? Do they stand out when you see them in supermarkets?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not going to go to the wall to defend the right for Aunt Jemima to remain Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben to remain Uncle Ben. But then we know the history. Look, these brands feel that they want to then update themselves and, you know, get with the times. I mean, look, obviously, good luck to them in how they try and work this out, because, of course, then for decades they've had these images, and I suppose, obviously, understandably, the concern is that if they are normalised as part of what consumers see, then, you know, who knows what sort of subconscious influences these brands are ultimately doing. But I suppose there is a line that has to be drawn, though, when you see, for example, you know, the rugby union, for example, is reviewing the use of the song, you know, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot of Fire, which is something that England fans really do love to sing, because apparently it's the worry is they'll be appropriating a slave anthem. And I think many of the fans wouldn't even realise that, wouldn't even know that. And I just think that, you know, so you have to be careful for things like that you're not sort of closing down sort of free expression, the sort of the joyful songs and music, you know, just for the
right.
cause of appropriation.
And that's exactly the argument that many have made about taking down statues, for example. I mean, some are obvious to be removed. Others, it's a bit of a blurred line. Are we trying to rewrite history? Nabila, what do you think? And why now? Why weren't images like this not acceptable 3 years ago, 5 years ago?
Well, clearly there's an international debate about race going on at the moment in the wake
of the... There's been international debates before.
Well, I think the horrific death of George Floyd in the US and the way, you know, he agonized to his death and the way it was broadcast around the world captured the imagination of the world and reset this global discussion about race and indeed police brutality and discrimination in all its forms. And that's why, you know, the rebranding of certain products, you know, are now a prime example of the kind of discussions we are having. And they range from statues being taken down to the rebranding of products, or as we saw yesterday, footballers taking the knee, wearing Black Lives Matters shirts. And this actually fits within the clubs and the industry's campaign with rooting out racism in football, which has been going on for longer than the current debate. I absolutely agree that the Auntie Jemima product should be rebranded because it fits into racial stereotypes around slavery. This is the image of a black woman who was born into slavery in the deep south of America, and the whole dynamic of the brand is of a nostalgia when slaves worked for white owners, and that's what all those
it's deeply uncomfortable, and I totally accept that, and that's clearly what the manufacturers have thought too. Let's go on to the row currently engulfing President Trump. Yet another book. This one by, you know, dyed-in-the-wool, true blue conservative Republican John Bolton. Asa, what do you make of this? And do you think it's going to actually make any difference to the Trump presidency?
Well, look, I'll tell you one thing. This president certainly is creating and inspiring a really long reading list. Many of these books, obviously written by former aides who seem to not be particularly pleased, like Mr. Bolton. And obviously there's all sorts of allegations and claims from him that are really incendiary, ranging from the fact that he thought Finland may have been part of Russia. He didn't know that the UK was a nuclear power, and that he was just incredibly sycophantic towards China, wants to have China, he alleges, to help him win the next election. And look, obviously, the president's fought back in very characteristic terms, saying, oh, it's all lies, and this guy is a sick puppy, in his terms. Apparently, that's a sort of African-American phrase I learned. But anyway, I digress. And what we learned is that it's one of those sort of, everyone takes something what they want to take from this. So Trump fans will just think this is another disgruntled dude, you know, hit job on our man. And actually, those who are Trump skeptic Well, thank
you. See, I mean, we laugh and we do laugh, and it's right to laugh in many circumstances. But is there also, you know, on the serious side, should we be considering these people disloyal? You know, they've taken a job, they've had a very high senior position, and then as soon as they're fired, they come out and write a book about their former boss. What do you think, Nabila?
Well, let's put it that way. Bolton is obviously trying to sell a book, and books nowadays are where the most vicious comments about politicians are made. Trump is far more likely to be wounded by a book or a Netflix documentary about him than by an attack by a politician, which just shows how weak politicians are nowadays, and dare I say, especially opposition politicians in the US at the moment. Now, Bolton's book is full of revelation and indeed accusations, including that Trump is unfit for office, that he's incompetent for the job. It also includes all sorts of salacious details. But I have to say that I didn't find any of them in the slightest bit surprising, let alone shocking. The incredible thing about Trump is that we've reached a point where he can no longer surprise us. And appalling allegations about everything from Trump's treatment of women to his alleged racism emerge in the very early stages of his election campaign, and they get worse all the time. So I think this book is
very,
just another...
very quickly, because we're just running out of time. Asa, do you think that Bolton, actually, with hindsight now, should have testified at the impeachment last year?
Look, I mean, the viciousness the Trump fans are throwing at him now, he would feel justified. Right now he's been called Book Deal Bolton, just because of the way he's gone at this. And what will matter is the election. The polls show that Joe Biden's about 9 points ahead. So really, coronavirus has ruined the Trump's economy, and it's his now to fight back and try and win.
Asa and Nabila, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, Germany has accused Russian officials of sanctioning the murder of a former Chechen rebel in Berlin last year. And British singer Dame Vera Lynn has passed away at the age of 103. That and more in Europe Today.
German prosecutors have accused Russian authorities of sanctioning the shooting of a former Chechen rebel in Berlin last August. Investigators have charged a man identified as Vadim K with murder and possession of an illegal weapon. Russia has denied killing Georgian citizen Torniki K, saying the accusations are groundless. Over in France, a Michelin-starred chef is employing and training people with disabilities. The trainees prepare all sorts of dishes. They also serve and present cheese platters. The most talented are hired in Yannick Alino's Parisian